Yes, and we are live. Congratulations. We have famous Steve Koelpin from TransUnion is on the live stream with Nick and Ed Bailey. We're here to talk about Steve's efforts to automate log onboarding. It's a great day to be here. I'm so glad Steve's on the live stream. So you want to kick it off, Nick?
Yeah, we get a lot of people who watch the video live, and we got a lot of people who
Mhm.
watch it offline as well. But I think a lot of folks may not know what TransUnion is, how many company or countries you guys operate in. So, Steve, maybe start with like an intro of, what's the TransUnion story? What does the company do?
Yeah, great question. So TransUnion is an information and insights company. So globally, we're a global company. We provide valuable information about individuals and try to build a holistic type score based on that individual and try to help businesses, try to connect them with businesses and offer credit and other services worldwide.
As a global company, like what does that mean? Like, do you operate independent bureaus or functions in different countries? Are things centrally run? And then is it like I don't know, like a globally distributed infrastructure? Like, what does that look like from an IT perspective?
Sure. So yeah, we have a footprint in quite a few countries around the world.
At
Um,
30.
Yeah, yep. So Ed used to be our manager before going over to Cribble, so he's quite familiar with the company.
Sure.
Yeah, we serve customers throughout the different regions of the world, and try to paint that holistic view of creditworthiness and other types of insights that companies may want to get.
Can I help a little
So
bit,
from a
Steve?
oh yeah,
Absolutely.
go ahead. Jump in.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, I mean, just a few things. I think TransUnion's biggest thing is about it being an information provider to all sorts of different, also to information provider to consumers, information provider to businesses. The idea to help facilitate trustworthiness and to help drive economic activity. I
Mhm.
think TransUnion does has a really great story, especially in developing countries, that help connect people who may not have traditional indicators of creditworthiness to be able to get credit at a bank, to be able to have a loan, and be able to have a credit card
Mhm.
and grow the economy. But it's way beyond just you know traditional credit stores, health information, all sorts of just information in general, and applying advanced analytics to get value out of the data. It's a powerful story, and it's truly a global company.
I imagine you
And
guys
I was
bump into a lot of issues with data privacy regimes and being able to
oh
move
yeah.
data around and things like that. So I think this log automation story with Cribble Stream is going to be a really good one. So those are my questions. Ed, I'll hand it over to you if you want to kick it off, or Steve, if you want to kick it off.
Yeah, I'll just give you a little bit of background. And so, I mean, we're like Steve and I worked together for a long time. And we first, before we had Cribble in the environment at TransUnion, really struggled with the amount of time that we spent on data, the amount of time we spent moving things around, the amount of time we spent just doing simple maintenance work. We brought Cribble in. So we took something that was, 7 to 14 business days. Once you brought Cribble in, we were able to get log onboarding down to 4 to 6 hours. And with Steve's work with automating log onboarding, getting it down to 15 to 30 minutes. And so
Mhm.
Wow.
that incremental ability to reduce time spent, reduce that, because there's two different metrics. There's the time of the task and the actual work spent on the task.
Mhm.
And so, and what Steve's done and with working with the rest of the TU team is driving that down, so that the dwell time, for lack of a better term, and the amount of time are both reduced concurrently. And
Mhm.
it's a great example of the value of automation and the value of being able to provide velocity, so that the developers aren't waiting around for an application deployment for logging. It's just there.
Mhm.
So is this a problem that's like unique to TransUnion? I mean, look, I know the answer. I work here at Cribble, but for people that may not be as familiar with the kind of problems that we're solving, getting data in is something we hear about all the time. But is this something that a lot of other companies are dealing with?
Oh yeah. Very common problem. Maybe might be a little easier for smaller companies who don't do a high frequency of onboardings. But when you get into more scale, it's really difficult to do a lot at once. Specifically around, you need engineers with domain knowledge. You need engineers that know who to talk to, getting the right information. There's so much more than just say onboard my logs. It's Need to verify, do you know what source type to onboard them against? Do you have a sample of your logs to validate that? Where are they going? What hosts are they going? What server class are they tied to? It's a lot of things going on, and it's definitely a problem industry-wide getting data in.
It's an enormous issue, especially in medium to large companies, because it's the customization of logs that's the issue. If every log was the same format, this would be trivial, but no log is the same format, and especially when you start bringing in custom application logs. But we see prospects routinely who will spend 6 to 8 weeks getting a single application into their logging tools, and it's an enormous barrier to productivity, because think about it, say, hey, I need to put my application into my monitoring tools. I got to wait 6 to 8 weeks for go live. And so it is a barrier of productivity, a barrier of velocity, and it's a huge problem. And this is why I'm so excited to have Steve share this. So Steve was going to be presenting this solution at a conference recently in June, and he got really sick. And so no more cruise ships for Steve. And so
always a bad idea.
Yes.
Yeah. So just a messy situation. And so Steve's team took over. They did the best they could, and I thought they did a great job. I was there, but I just want to have because Steve spearheaded so much of this work. Come on the live stream. This is your time to show this off. We're gonna have a lot of questions. I already see Chris is ready to ask some questions and poke the bear, and so we're but this is your time to shine, Steve. So just can you start talking about the what's the pain, what's the trouble, and then share how you solved it.
Sure. So before I get into how I solved it, want to throw out definitely a team effort amongst the team. So that stretched from dashboard design. One of our engineers, Karen Key, helped with dashboard design. A couple of other engineers, Chris on the call, helped with some of the solutioning of how it should be done. Mike Hauk also. David Olivas helped out with source type ledger, which we'll get into shortly. So, and also can't forget Conrad. He did a lot of the automation, back-end automation for us as well. So everybody, more of a team effort getting this thing done. We had a vision. We had a major problem. So the problem coming into this was we were the bottleneck for onboarding. We were the bottleneck in terms of onboarding logs, getting visibility. So anytime a BU or business unit onboards or spins up a new application or needs visibility, they need to get their logs onboarded so they can get that visibility, and they have the ability to see their logs in a central type view. And so the way that this was built at a super high level was, rather than us as the engineers, a small team doing the actual work, vetting all the data coming in, going back and forth with the requester, getting the right information and onboarding the logs, what we decided to do was rather create more of a self-service type model. So another big thing that we saw was we do a lot of agile type project planning, and a lot of teams would prioritize or create work that wasn't quite ready yet, and then put it into our work efforts or our active sprints, hoping by the time we get to it, their stuff will be live. So a lot of the time we would prioritize it, we'd be ready to do it, only to find out their instances haven't been spun up yet, they're not quite ready yet. We need to push it to the next iteration. This really compounded on itself over and over and over again, where we kept pushing work to the next iteration. And before you know it, after doing that a few times over, we started getting full iterations of work that wasn't quite ready yet. We had to keep pushing off, and it was just a major hassle. So coming back to how this was built, we enabled the requester to onboard logs when they were ready. So no more having to plan work, and hopefully it coincides with when we're ready to do it. No more having to wait on our team to do it. No more needing that massive domain knowledge from the engineer to onboard the logs. Whenever they're ready, they just come to the UI, enter some details, and push a button, and they're good to go.
Yeah, let's just talk about just a high level from a time standpoint. So it's domain knowledge on the application team, but also domain knowledge on the logging team. So the domain knowledge of knowing how to write the parsers. If you need to write a parser, that's not something everyone knows how to do. The ability to write timestamp recognition, the ability to deploy to your endpoints. Also, one of the things people hardly ever think about is when they do have to deploy parsers, then they got to roll their indexers. That can take a lot of time too, and that creates a substantial risk. And so we definitely want to talk about it as we go through the slides, talk about how, using Cribble, for example, you don't have to worry about parsers anymore. You don't have to roll your indexers. Timestamp recognition's baked into it. So many of those things are more on demand because you don't have to do those, typical maintenance tasks anymore.
You're on the money there, Ed.
Yep. Do you want me to go share the slides?
Yeah, let's dive into the slides.
All right. Yeah, just let me know when to advance them for you.
Perfect. So the 4 types of work. So anybody who may be familiar with this has probably read the Phoenix Project. So the way they define this is, if you kind of think of source types and their purpose, same exact thing for types of work. So we have 4 different types that the Phoenix Project define. So we have our business projects. That is typically the highest value type of work that you want to do. So that can include plan work, external work, anything that will add value to the overall business. And this is where you want your engineers spending the most amount of time. Next up, you have your updates, upgrades, and changes, something inevitable you hate doing, but you have to do it. Third, unplanned work. Everybody hates unplanned work, and I'm sure everybody on this call is familiar with it. That can include drive-bys, rework, tech bridges. Hey, 1 second, you got a minute, quick questions. Can you take a look? Everybody's familiar with it. Lastly, we have our internal IT projects. This is mainly what we're going to be talking about today for the self-service log onboarding. And IT internal projects are more of how can we streamline our processes or our internal processes to make our time more efficient. So Ed, if you go to the next slide for me.
Sure.
So talking about efficiency now, what we're looking at our PI 8. So we do a lot of project planning, and those familiar with project planning, you have a project manager, you track your work, you assign points to it, which can be tied to time, how difficult it is to actually do that work. Right now, we're looking in one of our recent PIs, so PI 8. So out of this entire PI, this is what was delivered, and 25% of everything delivered in PI 8 was log onboarding. So we had a lot of stories. Typically, it depends on the type of log onboarding. We have what we call a long log onboarding and a short log onboarding. Difference is for a long one, you typically have to write the inputs. You have to stick it into an app. You have to deploy it out, reload the server class, etc. Where the short onboarding is more so of adding a couple of hosts to a server class. So out of everything, 25% of our work is log onboarding. And you think about it, what could you do if you were to create a self-service model to where you could get back that 25%, or say maybe you don't get 100% back, but even if you get 50% back of that 25%, it's still a rather large savings. Next slide, Ed.
And that's the thing. I mean, I think it's important people to understand about Agile. There's a certain approach to Agile. Y'all were doing the more of the 50-year-old couch potato type of work instead of being Agile. And so, I mean, this is you're getting much more toward the spirit of Agile.
Oh yeah, certainly. So let's talk about the mission critical components here and how this entire thing works. So if we start from the top left, we look at the TA Web Tools add-on that is created by Splunkable. So they got a couple other pretty cool TAs out there. Definitely check them out. Next up, and actually the benefit we got from that Web Tools add-on, it gave us the ability to run the curl command from search and be able to trigger web hooks and send payloads to that webhook. So we use Rundeck as our workflow automation. So all of our automation happened in Rundeck, which then created pull requests using Git for our version control inside of Bitbucket. So Bitbucket is our repository where all of this is done. And obviously you can't trust your end users to do the right thing 100% of the time. You need some type of trust but verified method to that. And that's exactly what we're doing in terms of approving pull requests after they create them. And last but not least, Cribble. Cribble was one of the main mission critical components in making this work. We'll be getting into why shortly. Next slide for me, Ed. So before we get into why Cribble was so important, let's talk about the evolution of log onboardings. And I'm sure what most of you are probably familiar with. So that crawl, manually SSHing into the box, using inputs.conf and putting it right into Etsy system local, and then restarting the service manually. Terrible way of doing it. A lot of super small scale shops do it that way. I know when I started at a very small e-commerce shop and we had a very tiny license, that's precisely the way we did things, and it wasn't good. Terrible, great learning experience, but terrible way of doing it. Then the walk, where you're using the deployment server, you're updating inputs within apps, you're going by the book, you're managing server classes effectively, using version control, even using your props and transforms to line break and timestamp. So coming back to Cribble, one of the other cool features that Cribble gave us is, rather than that spray and pray method of what we were doing prior with props and transforms, Cribble gave us a super clean UI to be able to do that in. And I believe we have a slide coming up that's going to show that UI. So super easy way of doing things. Then obviously that run method of what we're talking about now. So coming to the process flow, one forward there from me, Ed.
Right. Yeah, we have a joke here at Cribble that crawl, walk, run is the live, laugh, love of business. So I always love to see that in the slides. That's great.
And make your Julia Roberts.
Yeah, great reference there. Anyway, looking at our process flow, we look at before self-service automation. Why does it take so long to onboard logs? I mean, it's easy in a small environment. You can have an engineer just go take care of it. But what if you're dealing with 10, 15, 20 log onboarding requests that have to be done ASAP? Everybody's stuff's important. Everybody wants it done now. How are you supposed to take care of all that quickly and efficiently? This could be a full-time job. And if we look at why, here's the entire workflow here. So a user comes into Rally, which is our work planning tool. They enter the details. The work unit then sits in the backlog. Project manager then sits with an engineer to scope the request. Easy to do, 3 minutes at most. The project manager then slots the request into an upcoming sprint. They determine who can do the work based off the scale and who's got availability in their timeline. Our sprint timelines are 2 weeks. So the engineer could do it the first day that the sprint starts. They could do it in the middle. They could do it at the end. They have 2 weeks to do that work unit. Once they do that work unit, this also assumes that the information that we got from the requester is correct. So we ask for index, source, suggested source type, sample data. Half the time they don't know what a source type is. What's that?
Log path. Log path.
Yep. And yeah, half the time we get incorrect data. Well, probably more than half. And we're stuck with checking it out, kicking it back to the requester, saying, nope, we need more information. So much time is wasted on that. Context switching, time wasted in terms of going back and forth. It takes so much time. Some users will get everything correct. They'll even understand what source types are. Another thing that Cribble really helps us out with is standardizing source types. We're going to be getting into that shortly. But anyway, assuming the engineer has all the correct information, they go in, they create a pull request. Then another engineer has to approve the pull request. The engineer then comes back after it's approved. They then merge the pull request. Once the pull request is then merged, the engineer has to go find the correct server class that's tied to that PR. They then have to go reload the server class. Then after waiting a few more minutes, they go into Splunk and they validate that the logs have been onboarded. They send an email to the end user saying, here's your logs. Very, very, very long time to do. And get very frustrating too. So Ed, if we can go to the next slide, please. We're going to show the after flow. So this is after of building self-service automation. So rather than the engineers have to, in the project manager, scope work out, slot work, and do it within their allotted time frame, we're completely shifting the type of work back to the end user or the requester. So the process flow now is a requester comes into Rally, they enter their work story just for tracking purposes. They then come directly into the UI and they enter their details directly into the Splunk UI. So the details, we'll be showing a picture in a moment of what that UI looks like. But what we call it is we call it our intake page. So the user will have a couple drop downs, they'll have a couple text boxes, and they'll enter their information. And then they'll click the submit button. It'll create a pull request automatically. Then 2 engineers on our team just simply have to review, approve, and merge. And then as soon as it's merged, it'll automatically get onboarded and send an email to the end user letting them know that their logs have been onboarded. All right, next slide, Ed. So let's talk about source types. So we had a major problem with developers, engineers, analysts, pretty much everybody in the organization who requests logs to be onboarded. We had a major problem with people wanting unique source types, or what I like to call the willy-nilly source types that just don't make sense. So we have thousands of source types in our environment. For anybody who may be familiar with source types, or well, maybe I should say unfamiliar with source types are going to define the shape of your data. And by the shape, I mean format. So you could have something where it starts with the beginning of event with the timestamp. The timestamp could be short date, like July or JUL space 10 space year space timestamp. It could be in brackets. It could be in digit form. So like 07/12/ whatever the year timestamp, etc. Or you can have the timestamp in the middle of the event. So that what the source type does, the source type tells the logging platform how exactly to find the timestamp in the event and how to break the event up properly so it correctly represents an event and you just don't have a bunch of jumbled text within one event. So the source types are super important. What we have a lot of people doing all the time is creating these unique custom source types, which us on the Splunk team, we hate it. The reason we hate it is every time that they request a new source type and we agree to do it, we have to go rewrite the props for it. Before Cribble, it was much more difficult to do. The reason it was much more difficult is you had to go into a configuration file, props.conf, and you had to write a stanza by hand. And it was difficult to do. You had to restart wherever you did it, the indexers, the heavy forwarder, etc. You had to restart it and hope it worked. There was no feedback in terms of, will this work as you're doing it? There's no testing it on the fly. It was very difficult to do. We're going to be getting into how Cribble helped us solve that in just a moment. So coming back to the source type ledger now, building this first solution and integrating it into the self-service log onboarding tool, what this does is this allows users to come to this dashboard here. They can go to that text box there and paste some sample data that they have, hit the submit button, and this is going to return back a suggested source type that's going to match what they think the source type should be. The way it works is it looks at your sample data, it pulls out the punctuation, and it matches against the punctuation of what's in Splunk on raw, and return source types that have that identical match. So super cool way of identifying what your source types are that you currently have in Splunk and what can you reuse. And that's what we're really trying to pitch here, is maximizing reusability on source types. That's why Cribble is so important to us. And if we can go to the next slide, Ed. So getting into how Cribble helped us solve this source type problem now. So number one, this is our source type management tool. This is Cribble. So going into the knowledge and then going to our breakers, we have all of our props breakers in here. So super easy way of doing it. Before I was describing how we did it in Splunk and how it was so difficult, Cribble made this a million times easier. So in Splunk, we had a comp file. We just had to drop a stanza in there, save the file, restart the service, hope it worked. Go to Splunk, validate. Nope, didn't work. Go back to the comp file, try it again. And this is also navigating change requests. And I'm sure a lot of you who have to deal with your change team, or you have a very stingent change team, they could be difficult to navigate around sometimes. Cribble, completely different experience now. So Cribble gives you the benefit of going directly into the user interface, dropping some sample data in there, and being able to build your props in a super clean user interface. So you can define your timestamp, you can define how the events break. They give you suggestions on what they think it should be based off what you're putting in. It allows you to then click the out button to see how it would look if you applied those rules against new data coming in. And it gives you immediate feedback without having to restart the service. You can deploy it out. It's got version control built in. So it completely changed the way with how we're doing line breaking, timestamping, setting up source types. But our ultimate goal here is we really wanted to minimize source type usage and maximize reusability.
Steve, one thing I want to add is, just from a risk standpoint, every time you had to add something like this to props, you got to push them down. You got to push that down to your indexers, and more than likely you're going to have to restart your indexers when you do that. And so from a risk perspective, every time you restart your cluster, you potentially run into some issues. But also from a staffing perspective, not everyone is as good as David and Porig at writing props. And so this is something that really was appealing about Cribble, because you have a visual event breaker, so that even someone like myself could use a visual event breaker to test the data, make sure it works. And so it minimizes rework and minimizes problems by being able to test it out before you make the push. And with Cribble, you don't have to restart anything. It's a live reload. So just easier, faster, and a lot less risk. And also you get the whole staff involved, not just the smart people.
Bingo. And the other benefit I like about it too, and we've used this feature a lot, is the built-in version control. So if you do mess something up, you do commit it, you do deploy it, super easy to roll it back and get back to your prior state. So really cool way of doing things.
Next slide.
Yep. All right, so here's the intake process now. So if a user wanted to onboard logs, they would come to this dashboard here, and this is where all the magic happens. And we do have a short demo. Hopefully we can get that thing to load. That will show a complete end-to-end process of onboarding logs. So top left, the user would enter their Rally user story number. The second text box, they would enter their path or where their logs reside. Third drop-down box is going to represent the index, and we are searching against existing indexes within our log platform. Next up, we have our source types. That loads up all existing source types relative to the index that was selected. And lastly, the client name. The client name is going, so we had a pretty large cloud project, and we had a pretty clever way of trying to go about how to associate instances that can spin up and down at will, how to associate those to a server class, and how to ensure that we always have the most up-to-date instance. So what we did was we built a client name that is going to house some instances behind that. We're going to get into the client name shortly, but that last dropdown that we see at the bottom is going to represent the client name, or a concatenation of AWS tags that are defined when the instances are built. And we'll be getting to that shortly. All right, next slide.
Yep.
So when the user clicks the submit button, they then will open a new tab, which will run a new Splunk search. This is a Splunk search that kicks off. Oh, that we just had up. If we go back one slide. Oh, yeah, I think you may have. Yeah, here we go. So it's going to run this Splunk search here. This is automatically going to build your inputs.conf, your serverclass.conf, and it's also going to run that curl command. So if we look at that curl command where it's highlighted, kind of the middle of the screen there, this is from that web tools TA that I was talking about earlier. So this gives us the ability to run curl and run a post at search time. And what we're doing is we're grabbing that server class entry, or that server class entry and that inputs entry, and we're packaging that up into a field called data, and we're passing that payload to that curl command. That curl command is hitting a webhook, which is then calling our workflow automation via rundeck, and it's dropping that payload that it collects from this search into the workflow automation. Next slide, please. And so what we're looking at is after the user submits that, after the pull request goes in, this is what it's going to look like. So if we look at the bottom left, we see that serverclass.conf entry. And this is what it looks like within our repository Bitbucket. We see then the inputs.conf entry as well. And the automation is pretty cool. Conrad built out the automation. And what it does is it basically checks, does an existing serverclass.conf entry exist? If it does, ignore it. If not, go ahead and add it. And it does the same thing for the inputs. It will dedupe if there's any existing inputs, or it will append to the correct app if there's not. Next slide, please. Getting into the automation and how it works now. So we have our EC2 instances. They're tagged with 6 attributes. So back to what I was talking about earlier with this client name. So right now, a lot of you are probably familiar with adding clients to the whitelist in serverclass.conf. And doing that with instances are difficult because they can go up and down at will. So hard coding instances directly to a certain server class can be challenging. So what we did was we created what we call the client name. The client name is going to be a concatenation of 6 tags, which are selected when the instance is being built in the AWS console. That can include the region, the environment, the control tower, the domain, the product, and the subproduct name. Those are concatenated together to represent the client name. That's going to give us some uniqueness. Once those are concatenated, that is then defined in the deploymentclient.conf. And once that's applied in our deploymentclient.conf, that can then represent our TA name and our server class name. And we also put a monitoring stanza on all of the deploymentclient.confs, which go to every instance. And it gives us the ability to look at new client names as they're coming in or as they're getting spun up and they're logging into Splunk. Next slide, please. Automation continued, maybe a little difficult to see here, but kind of what I described earlier. We have a Rundeck workflow automation that Conrad created, and this is going to have some super simple conditional logic. Does the entry to the existing TA exist? If it does, ignore the entries that we're trying to push through, send an email to the end user telling them that their entry was deduped, nothing's going to happen. If it doesn't exist, add that entry to the serverclass.conf, add it to the inputs.conf, create a pull request. Once the pull request is review, approve, merge by our team, then we have another webhook which is sitting on the merge process, which then reloads that serverclass.conf for us, or reloads the server class for us. And once the server class is reloaded, and a email is sent out to the end user, letting them know where their logs reside with a nice link, and it allows them to click on it to validate that their logs have been onboarded. And really, the real value of this is being able to automatically associate an instance with a common grouping, i.e. the server class. All right, let's get into the demo. Can we give this a try, Ed?
Yep, let's cross our fingers. Yeah,
all right.
All together. Here we go. So, all right, let's see. All right, let's give it a second, see if this thing loads.
All right, I have faith this is going to work eventually. While we're waiting for that, though, Steve, so who are the users of this automated system today? Mm-hmm. Developers?
Yeah, great question. So I would say probably, you know, that I think about it now, I would say a majority of our users, we have a lot of users who need logs onboarded, which can range from developers, engineers, analysts, QA for doing load testing, performance testing. So not exclusively to developers, I would say to a lot of our internal stakeholders that we have a lot of users.
Okay. And so for them to, you know, they're I guess they were used to kind of throwing this over the fence to you. Oh, I'm not sure who.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, good. Okay, good. You're still there. You fell off my screen. But they're used to throwing this stuff over the fence to you. And then now you've kind of put it in their hands.
Bingo.
What was that like? I mean, were they like, you know what, man, I'm just really happy just throwing this over the fence. And then you kind of make them responsible for it. Did they embrace that with open arms? Were they reluctant?
Here we go. It's working.
Here we go. All right. We'll take that offline.
Sure.
All right.
So now we have all this selected. We're going to go ahead and hit the submit button. This is going to load up another panel. We want to confirm that we have the correct information here. That is the correct client name. Go ahead.
Hey, this is really, let me start it over.
The solution works at a very high level.
There you go.
Let's go ahead and give a walkthrough on a real live example and do a real onboarding. So this is our
I'm going
intake
to full screen
page.
this as
This
well.
is what the end user is going to interact with. So rather than us as engineers having to go and do the work for them and plan it, slot it, and create the pull request, execute it, validate it, and send the results out, we're going to share some of the work with the end user. So the end user would visit this intake form, and first they'll be getting their Rally user story number. Anyone familiar with an agile framework is very familiar with project planning. So this is simply a number that goes with the onboarding request. Next up, we want to put the path of the data, or where we want to add that monitoring stanza. We then want to select the index from the dropdown. Once selected, we have our next dropdown, which is going to represent the source type. We want to select the source type that belongs within that index. And lastly, we have the client name. The client name is simply a concatenation of tags from the AWS console. So now we have all this selected. We're going to go ahead and hit the submit button. This is going to load up another panel. We want to confirm that we have the correct information here. That is the correct client name. Go ahead and click that, and we will click to create our pull request. This is going to throw up a warning initially. We're simply using an output lookup and send email. So it's just letting us know, are you sure you want to run this? And yes, we do. This is going to run, and looks like we got a successful pull request. So now we're going to wait for that to be notified about that pull request. And a few things here, which I really like, is we have the ability to grab this URL, and this is going to be supplied to the end user when they do the onboarding, so they can simply copy that, open a new tab. All right, and it looks like we just got notified of our recent pull request coming in. Here we are. All right, so here is our input stanza. This is what you would build when typically doing an onboarding request. We see that it has that monitoring stanza that we just included. And it also has that index and source type, along with some additional meta tags. So now, as an engineer, this is where we would take over. We would review it, make sure everything looks correct. We would go ahead and approve the pull request. We wait for the build to complete. Once the Jenkins build is complete, we go ahead and merge it. After merging, it then fires off a webhook, which then kicks off the workflow. Let's dive deeper into the workflow with Conrad.
Hello, this is Conrad, and let's look at the workflow behind the scenes. Some of the details that's going on in the back end after the data is moved from the Splunk dashboard. The first thing is done is it's converted into a JSON object and moved to an orchestration software called a Rundeck. We use Rundeck for a lot of fun automation stuff at TU, but in this instance we're utilizing Python to do a handful of things that allow for this auto onboarding. The first thing that happens is that we clone the Splunk repository locally to the Rundeck server. This repository represents what we have being monitored in production. In addition to this, it takes the JSON object that was passed from the Splunk host and starts processing it. It does a handful of sanity checks, including checking for duplicates. So if this resource has already been onboarded or this specific file is already being logged in a specific location, it will fail the workflow and notify the user that it's not going to proceed any further because it's already being monitored. But in most instances where this is a brand new resource to be onboarded for logging, it will go to the location where it cloned the repository and write or append new files depending on the change. If this is brand new, it's going to write the new files, but if it's just appending to something that exists, just we need a new location monitored, it will append whatever is existing in the repo. In addition to this, it will create a branch for these specific changes, and once the branch is created with these changes for this new onboarding, it will make a pull request which notifies the Splunk admins that these resources need to be onboarded or want to be onboarded, and if they're rejected, they get deleted out. But if they're approved, we have a separate workflow that reaches out to Rundeck through a webhook and reinitializes these new server classes after the Bitbucket repo is merged, which saves a lot of time not only for the Splunk engineers but any teams trying to get their logs onboarded in a timely manner. This has saved both teams a lot of time.
A lot of time indeed. So the user now comes back to what they selected earlier, and they wait for their logs to be onboarded. So while we wait, let's go ahead and look in our internal index, and let's go see what's happening behind the scenes. All right, so we can see that we see some action here on this new monitoring stanza we just deployed. Waiting a few more minutes, we got some more logs rolling in based off what we just onboarded. So we can see success here. We see a bunch of action. We now come back to that URL that we got from that intake form, and let's go take a look and see if our logs are onboarded. And we got logs.
All right, that's super cool. We're switching back to the deck. Nice job, Steve.
Sorry about that. I was on mute.
Yeah, that was really interesting.
Yeah, let's Nick, coming back to your question, let's save that for the end. We got like two more slides and we'll dive right back into that.
Sounds good.
So, lessons learned along the way. Provide users with feedback. What in terms of feedback, what we mean is for instance, when the user runs that search, that runs that curl command that creates that pull request, give them feedback that their pull request was successful or it failed, or tell them why it failed. If you don't provide that feedback, a lot of the times they'll hit it multiple times. They'll create duplicate PRs, cause problems, and basically you want to let them know that what they did, it actually worked as expected, and they also get an email as well. And providing that feedback really helps them understand why it didn't work as expected. Next up, enforce standardization. We spoke about source types, maximize reusability. Developers love to create custom source types. They like to put application names in the source type. They like to put environment names in the source type. Terrible idea. Don't do that. Reason you don't want to do that is because you can't reuse it against other applications. Like if you have, say, Tomcat runtime logs, if you were to create a unique source type relative to a specific application, you'd have to create a new source type for a different application for standard runtime logs. Same thing with the environment. You should never put an environment name inside of a source type because you can't reuse that source type against different environments. You want to try to have a really standard set of source types and maximize reusability. And Cribble really helps us with that. And the other benefit, why Cribble helps us with that, we actually had a spat because the developers love creating those unique source types. And the reason they like it is because at search time, super easy to pivot off of a source type name if you have it within the application. Cribble helped us out with that because what we were able to do is we were able to create fields on the fly. So a lot of you are probably familiar with doing that with Rex. We had a problem though, where they wanted to extract out the third or the fourth segment from the source. And we can't do that with an automatic Rex. You have to do that inline in a search if you want to extract out a segment within a particular field, say source. Cribble made that super easy. You go to the Cribble UI. It took less than 2 minutes to find it, to create that extraction based off a certain segment, based off a certain field coming in. So after appeasing the developers and giving them unique fields that pull segments and create the fields they're looking for, made it super easy to pivot off of those unique fields and completely sold them on the fact that they don't need custom source types anymore to do what they want to do. So unique source types, try to eliminate them, standardize your source type naming, and really try to reuse as much as possible. And lastly, don't give up when things get hard. This is a very high pressing project for us to do. We were the blocker in a lot of cases. We had to remove that blocker. And we did that by creating the self-service automation.
A couple of questions, Steve. So I assume this is for fairly standardized logs. How do you handle non-standard or new logs that don't meet existing standards?
Yep. So we run into that. Definitely takes an effort to clean things up. It's not going to happen overnight. As I said prior, we have thousands of source types here. So we use that source type ledger. We push new users to find an existing source type.
Uh-oh. It's like Florida's frozen over.
I wasn't sure if it was me or you or him or what.
Yeah.
But all right.
It's-
So
Let's see if Steve's laptop recovers. Yeah.
yeah, let's see if he catches up.
Well, so it's like not it's hell that's frozen over. Florida's frozen over.
It's the only place in the country that might be frozen,
Yeah.
at least on internet. Well, I mean, this is such a force multiplier for a team
Exactly.
spending 25% of its time
hmm
onboarding new logs. I mean, that's staggering, or adjusting new logs as they come in. I mean, it's really frees you up to do a lot of other stuff that's on your plate instead of just fighting with logs all the time.
Right, and this goes back to the whole thing about elevating staffing. I mean, elevating staffing is so ridiculously important, and I think, and this is where just you're able to get more value. You're able to have your team drive business value, and then take a time consuming task and make it smaller and have a lot less put a lot less effort into it. Hey, Steve, you there?
Yep, I'm here. We have a big thunderstorm that just rolled in and knocked the power out for a moment, and router's offline, so I am back.
Right,
I'm impressed it came back this quickly.
Yep,
Yeah,
jumped on the hotspot on my phone.
Well done. Well done. Hopefully the storm isn't too bad, but thanks for coming back. Ed and I were just talking about like what a time savings this is for a team that spends 25% of its time onboarding logs.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, we've had great adoption on this. And Nick, coming back to your question earlier when we tried getting the video to play, and that was in regards to how are people taking to this? Are they using it? Do they like it? And yeah, I feel like we've given the power back to them. They no longer have to wait on us. They don't have to bother us to, can you take a look? This is an emergency. We need it now. I feel like we've had great adoption of it. We've had a lot of people using it. We still have a few problems along the way that we definitely, we're hammering out as time progresses. What we do is we have our bi-weekly customer calls. So we push all rework or all why didn't it work? What's going on with this? How do we do this? Any questions that we have, we just push it to the bi-weekly customer call. We hold it for an hour at a time. And if anybody has any questions, we solve their problem on the spot and get them bootstrapped. So we've had great reception to this. We've had, I think, 12 different users on board, north of 50 separate pull requests. So we definitely have a lot of buy-in right now of people actually using it. And we're just trying to facilitate that handoff further throughout the company now.
Got it.
I think once you get more log standardization, you'll be able to use this even more and just keep pushing forward. And I think that's the thing. I think other people would want to ask is, what if if you have something new? What do you have? Like, do you have any kind of checkpoints, any place in the process flow to prevent non-standard logging, data that doesn't make sense, timestamps? I mean, are the users validating timestamps, for example?
Yeah, great question. So coming back to the source types now, that's one thing that we had to agree on prior to establishing this solution. Was we had to be more diligent as engineers when reviewing, approving, and merging. So gone are the days of simply glancing at the diff checker, approving it, and then merging it. Now we have to put a little more effort into just validating that that source type looks correct. We've also moved from having one engineer approve it to 2 engineers. So 2 engineers now have to approve it before it can get merged. Anything questionable, we can quickly plug it directly into the source type ledger, validate that they're using the correct source type. And for any non-standard logs that may be coming on, if we don't have a source type that fits that unique type of data yet, super easy to do now, especially with Cribble. They could, we have a slot to where they select their index, and if there's no source type listed that they need, there's an option. And Karen Key from our team actually thought of this solution. Was they could, if they select not found, it'll create a text box where they can enter in what source type they want. And there's also, this is going to notify us that, hey, this is a custom source type. Kind of lets us know to be on the lookout for it. And once that custom source type comes in, we have to go to Cribble and we have to create the props for it. But it's not quite as complicated as it used to be. Super easy to do. We go to our breakers, we enter in the new source type name, we create the line breaking, the time stamping, and really easy to do. So yeah, it may take a little extra work if it doesn't exist now, but Cribble's really been a mission critical component in driving this thing and making it work efficiently and effectively.
Very, very cool. I just want to, anybody in the community, does anyone have any questions? So we have, so let's see. Yeah. So Steve, do you see Pork is ask some questions?
Yeah, I didn't see the comments, but hey, Pork, what's up? Let's see.
So he's saying,
yeah, if you click over on the right-hand side, you can see there's private chat and there's comments.
Yeah, I see it now. So Pork's question was, do the users provide an estimated daily log ingestion? How do they enforce or review the daily ingest rate after onboarding? Any issues thus far with developers inaccurately specifying daily ingest size? Pork, you know the answer to this question. So Pork used to work with us as well. He's very familiar with the entire process. So at a high level, no. Something we definitely have to get around. Yeah, that's a tough challenge, and that's something we definitely have to wrap our hands around in terms of how can we trust what they're telling us is correct, and how can we enforce license usage. So unfortunately, that falls out of scope of what we were doing here. We were just trying to ease the user experience for onboarding logs.
Yeah, sensitive data is another big issue. You work in any kind of regulated financials. Previous process was, if when you're putting the log on board, you have to attest that this is not PII, PCI, whatever, and so you have to give up some things in order to automate it, and then essentially try to catch it on the back end. But it just, those are, you got to make some choices. This is what it is.
Mm-hmm.
James Curtis also wants to, so he's going to watch the video, but he might have some follow-up questions for you in the community, Steve.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Any questions after the fact, feel free to follow up.
Question for you. How long did it take to build this, like from end to end?
Mm-hmm. Great question. So initially we had this pending problem for a while. We went back and forth on how to build it. What really inspired me to kind of take this direction was a few things. So we had a fellow on the team, David Olivas, back in the day, who attempted this with an on-premise log onboarding solution. He took the approach of using Puppet roles to try to build server classes and deploy it out. I kind of jumped on that idea, but changed it with client names based off of our AWS cloud onboardings. So kind of the same concept I borrowed from David. Create that intermittent piece, which you can tie all of your instances to and build it out. So coming in terms of how long did this take to build? It took a few months. So we kind of had, first we had to define the project. We had to enable our cloud transformation. We were in the way quite a bit in terms of log onboarding. We didn't have a lot of visibility. So we had to enable them. And the best way to enable them was to remove the blocker to onboard logs. So overall, I think from end to end to identify what the problem was, solution it, build it, operationalize it, I think it took about 2 months, 2.5 months, maybe.
Not bad at all.
And that's a part-time project too. Steve has a whole plethora of other things to do.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, now he's got the time to do it.
There you go.
Oh yeah, certainly.
Hey, who did the source type ledger?
What's that?
The source type ledger? Who created the source type ledger?
Yep. So that was another creation of David Olivas and myself. So I can't recall. It's been probably 4 years ago since we built that. We had a major problem with source types, developers wanting crazy source types. So I think I initially had the idea with messing around with the punctuation, trying to match what users are putting in. Then David kind of helped build that thing and bring it to life. So I would credit David and myself for coming up with the source type ledger.
Very cool. And so can you tell us what are the future? What's the next couple of 2 or 3 features you want to add onto this in the near future?
Mm-hmm. Great question. So number 2 thing we're trying to target is on-prem, doing this for our on-prem onboarding. So the most pressing issue we had was enabling our cloud transformation, getting out of the way for them to do their work. So that was the first pressing need. We definitely have a need to do this for on-premise. So I would say that's going to be number 1. Number two, we do have a few feature updates. Number two, I think, would have to deal with PII data, giving the users the ability to explicitly tell this that we're onboarding PII data. And the way we currently handle PII data now is in Cribble. We do all of our routing in Cribble. So there are a few times where we inadvertently route PII data to the wrong location. And upon investigation and discovery of that, we have to clean it up immediately. But a lot of that's done in Cribble. We probably need to get a little better at that if the user needs to explicitly define what type of data is where they want it.
Yeah, and that's a big issue, because when there's a leak, you got to stop what you're doing. There's a whole fire drill around it.
Oh yeah.
And so it's just, coming up with some process and technological angles. That's one of the things I like, is this is a combination of people, process, and technology to build a solution. So I mean, y'all have done a great job.
Yeah, definitely. And Steve, as Ed mentioned, folks may have some follow-up questions. We've been going for nearly an hour here. Probably need to wrap it up. Can they find you in the community? What's your handle?
Yeah, absolutely. So any questions that you have, definitely reach out to Cribble and they can connect us. In the community, I'll post actually, I don't see an option to post anything in chat here.
But is it Steve Koelpin, or I mean,
Yep.
how they find you? Yeah, there we go. So just look for Steve Koelpin.
Yeah, it'll pop right up. So the name in Google, LinkedIn, pop right up. I got another fella named Steve Koelpin as well, who's a pastor over in Wisconsin. So he's got a LinkedIn right below mine. But I think my first one, I think mine is the first one to pop up. So any questions at all, if you want to link up and see this thing live or ask more questions, either you could add me there, you can reach out to Cribble directly, and they'd be happy to hook us up.
Yeah,
Fantastic.
community Slack's an option too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Steve, really appreciate your time. We want to have you back.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks for sharing this with the community. Really appreciate it. And best of luck going forward.
Yeah, right on. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it as well.
I appreciate it. Thank you for our audience. We appreciate it. Take care. Have a great day. Bye-bye.